Can you tell us about the Memento Mori?
Yeah. So Memento Mori. Memento Mori is a so far is a it's a flag. Um, None of us have really been able to define what this memento mori means or is. All we know is that it's attached to a threat, and the threat is really big. Um, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of lives are being threatened. That to me is where where the stakes go, you know, through the roof for us because now we have a crazy dilemma. You know, we could do this very conventionally, but if we have certain tools that may able to help us prevent this from happening, where is the sacrifice really? And I think that for all these characters, each one of them having a certain automotive, but most importantly, each one of them have a certain point of view on the matter, and that conversation is going to be happening in real time as we're trying to solve, or prevent this from happening. So eventually, a lot of unpredictable last-minute decisions are going to have to be made, and at a very high cost. So certain things are definitely coming when it comes to that. But Memento Mori is it's an underground movement that is threatening the safety and the security of our country.
And how involved does Blake get with Reed Diamond's character in trying to find the precogs?
Yeah. So Mr. So Bluntfield, he is the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he's one of the guys who first got introduced to the Memento Mori, brings our precinct in because we have a high ranking arrest, track record, so they said, okay, this is the precinct to try, and the Hawkeye system, it seems like it's working because they're solving crimes a lot.
Yes, it's a Hawkeye system.
This
That's what it's doing.
Hawkeye system is killing it right now. So then he goes, okay, well let's look for the help of this precinct, which seems like they're doing something right. And eventually he brings me in as the boss of the precinct to be alert that there is something coming. As this relationship is involved, and he visits the precinct a lot more often, and we single out Detective Vega as the leading detective in solving most of these crimes, she gets introduced to this thread as well as I get introduced to this thread. Eventually, that ties in. I'm trying to figure out how to say it without giving away that. But eventually, that ties into a certain necessity, right? A critical necessity that we have to eventually have a conversation about. When or if Blake ever finds out about this precog, and now knowing the stakes are this high, understanding that now for Mr. Bluntfield, his priority is to find the precogs, and in his conversation is to find the precogs because he's keeping his options open because we need to do anything physically possible to prevent this from happening. And the precogs are one of those possibilities. Needless to say that maybe his personal agenda also will weigh in there because maybe he does want something more with the precogs that just this threat. For us, is the conversation that brings me into this is, are you willing to do anything that it takes to save hundreds of thousands of people? Or, are you going to stand by your friend and your longtime partner? And that's gonna be crazy because for him, he's a super loyal guy, but he's also been trained since he was a Marine to defend, and on the battlefield, pretty much everything counts, so Blake is being brought into Blake has become now this threat, this bridge. The bridge is the gap between our everyday operation and something larger than we can't even understand how massive it could be. And he eventually has to play both sides, but he's going to have to make a choice. And how he makes that choice and how he politically actually makes it okay is going to be very tricky. And it starts, now when we're getting into episode 7 and 8, you introduce, the stakes. Episode 8 really defines what Blake's point of view on this entire situation that's happening with Vega is. It's a crazy episode. It's an awesome episode. you learn so much about Blake, but you also learn about, you know, where his mind is when it comes to this stuff. And then throughout that episode, he gets a type of realization, and you know, you'll have to see what the realization is, but it's either way. You know, it goes either that way or it goes this way. You know, and you see that in episode 8, and now in episode 9, now the threat is here. This is going down, and and they have to be on the same page, but Blake doesn't. You know, he's gonna have a tough time really being okay with breaking certain rules and manipulating certain conversations from that side and this side, you know, to solve the case.
Well, we were talking with Megan because we were saying that it seemed kind of obvious that Blake is going to find out about Dash, right? And so you're talking about maybe using that to stop this bigger threat, and she was saying that how he's very by the book. But do you think that there's morality in him, that he's like weighing the possibility of, you know, destroying these Dash's life or the lives of the three, or do you think that it's really just it's like very regimented way of thinking that whatever it takes? Well, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
My thought is for me, I feel Blake is the type of guy that, you know, he came from a very human place, you know, especially because he's also ethnic, he's a minority, he's come above certain things, and in episode 8 you really find out, you know, how he came above, and we also dabble a little bit on an immigration conversation on episode 8. He's directly attached to, you know, to the topic, and has history within the topic. There's an amendment that may or may not have passed that really damaged a lot of the pride and a lot of the, you know, a lot of the involvement of a lot of minorities in the future. So so that's something that, you know, he experienced, he can relate to that community about, but also the way he was raised. You know, when he was a teenager, you find out that something was going to happen to his mother that eventually was prevented by the pre-cops. I mean, the pre-cops came and took someone that, you know, that could have been, that something bad could have happened. And at that point, you know, as a teenager, all he thought about is like, oh, cool, well, that's what happens. You prevent the crimes. Cool. He doesn't know what's attached to the force. He just identifies the cop as the guy who saved his mom. You know, and then later when, you know, when eventually that conversation happens, is when eventually his dad wakes up. You know, that's the moment where he's eventually his human side, you know, creates the worst dilemma. Because if he was just, you know, the Marine,
right,
he would just do what he has to do. But based on, you know, episode 8, you know, he's reminded fairly quickly how very much human and how much in common he has with the person that he once, you know, loved and eventually was partnered with, you know. And that's going to make things complicated, specifically episode 9 and 10, because he's, you know, you're going to need Blake. Blake is going to be needed on either side in order to pull this off. And which side he's going to be on, it's yet to be seen.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, guys.
Those were very awesome